Welcome to In Confidence, where what we share in confidence helps us grow in confidence. Today, we're going to be talking about the exciting world of women's sports. I think we're sitting at one of the most exciting moments for women's sports globally. The confluence of real investment in teams, media and streaming rights that have eliminated gatekeepers of network television, superstars, and a community of fans that have galvanized around every single sport that women are participating in. Not since Title IX have we seen this amount of momentum and investment in a space that I'm very passionate about. Today, I got a chance to speak with Jenny Nguyen, the founder and CEO of the Sports Bra, the first ever sports bar 100% dedicated to showing women's sports. It's an enlightening conversation where we get to dive into our immigrant upbringings, but also the guts it takes to be the first and a trailblazer in a space that many people push back on. She created a community of enthusiasts, and she's now franchising the Sports Bra into a concept that will be in every major city in America. Let's listen in. Well, I'm really excited because on today's episode of In Confidence, we have Jenny Nguyen, the founder of the Sports Bra. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm happy to be here.
Well, before we get into it, can we just do a special shout out to our friend Erin Gallagher, the founder of Hype Women, who brought us together?
Oh my gosh, Erin's the best. Talk about the absolute hype woman. I mean, she defines it and she carries it in her heart and soul, and it like radiates from her body. It's amazing. I love her.
Well, I love her because she just unabashedly promotes all of us. There's no competition, there's no envy. And she just says, okay, all these incredible women, you all have to know each other.
Oh yeah, and she's totally unapologetic about it. You know, she has no walls or like self-doubt, or at least the ones that she shows about where she's coming from and what she stands for. And that to me is like the ultimate bravery.
Well, and we collaborated because we did this Hype Women Gravitas collaboration, this beautiful shirt that I have. And we asked all the women that were part of the project to contribute a quote. And I'm just going to read the quote that you contributed because it's so beautiful. And it says, all the things I imagined the bra doing in 10 years, we did in year one. And I realized that I hadn't dreamed big enough. Boom. Well, that's what we're going to get
There it
into
is.
today. Wow.
There it is.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's get into it because I want to hear about all your dreams. Tell me first a little bit about you, your journey, everything that I need to know about you.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I know that the podcast has limitations on time. But yeah, so born and raised native Portland, Oregonian. My parents immigrated from Vietnam in 75. So first generation Vietnamese American. And my first love was basketball. I picked up a
Mm.
basketball around the age 5 and started playing at 6 or 7 and really didn't put it down until about, I would say about 6 months after we opened the sports bra. I tried to continue and it wasn't feasible for my work schedule, or my body. And so basketball had been in and out of my life and part of my identity for a very, very long time. And growing up here in Portland, I witnessed from a very young age, all the way through my adulthood, an incredible passion and support for women's sports.
Mm.
My dad took me to University of Portland games when I was little, and we watched Shannon McMillan and Tiffany Milbritt just clean it up. And like the stadium was tiny, the bleachers around the field were tiny, but I remember it being packed. And then, we went to the UP games where Christine Sinclair and the Rapinoe sisters were playing, and those games were packed. And then the ABL came to town, and there was thousands of people who showed up for that. And then when it turned into the WNBA, there were thousands of people who showed up for that. And then obviously when the Portland Thorns and the NWSL kicked off, the Portland fandom
Mm.
around the Thorns really defined what women's soccer fandom looked
Mm.
like internationally. We had the most wild and insanely dedicated and loyal fans. And now we're starting to see that as more of the norm, which is fantastic. But, the Thorns were really doing it a decade ago or more. And so as a young kid growing up, I just saw over and over women's sports fandom. And so when this idea about the sports bra kind of bit me like a bug, I started to do research, and that was when I found out that there hadn't been a
Mm.
space like this in existence, which I didn't know. I kind of was just like, I wonder how other women's sports bars have done in the past. And then the more I looked it up, the more I found that it wasn't happening or it hadn't happened yet. And that's when things got real scary. And, the fear crept in. But I started to really think about Portland, my hometown, what I'd witnessed as women's sports fandom for a long time. And I just thought if it could exist anywhere, I think Portland would be the place. And so, in 2022, we opened the doors in April. So we're about to celebrate our 3-year anniversary coming up, April 1st. So we're really excited about that. And since we've opened the doors, it's just been not just the sports bra, but women's sports in general. The movement has been astronomical, rocket ship, like cultural shift.
Yeah.
And, it feels like to me, such an honor and a blessing to be alive to witness a trajectory like this for women's sports, which is mostly it's about time.
Yeah.
Women have been playing sports for a long time, and also to have the bra be a part of the movement is very, very special.
Well, I want to double click on something you just shared because one of the
Sure.
things we talk about here is your life story is your leadership story. And my parents came to the United States from Taiwan in the 70s. And for us growing up in LA, sports was a way for us to integrate into the culture. So the Lakers paid for my first year of college. We watched
Wow.
basketball because it was our way of accessing American culture was through sports. And so when I hear you tell your story, I also, and I'm not just, I'm saying this for me, it was a way for immigrants to feel like they were connected to something that was very American. Was that true for you?
That definitely felt true for my family. I mean, it was the heyday of the Blazers right after, they'd won the championship. And then there was just like so many playoff runs, so many finals. And I just remember like some of my best memories of the whole family being together. I mean, we often had huge family, elaborate family dinners,
Yeah.
but we would have them around the Blazers playoff schedule and things
Yeah.
just got cranked up like a not like 10 notches.
Yeah.
It was madhouse. But like as an actual girl playing basketball, it was very much
Mm.
um, not promoted in my family, especially my mom. Like being an only child too, my mom is very much like into hair, makeup, style, heels, purse, like all of the things. And so for her to have a daughter at a very young age, really be interested in not just sports but basketball, um, it wasn't really like it wasn't she wasn't into it. And then I was probably one of the only girls in the whole family that kind of leaned towards sports. I do have a couple cousins that did cheerleading. Um, but yeah, so the connection for me in basketball really came through with the Blazers and like their
Mm.
playoff runs, and then that connection with the family around these just massive dinners and parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but I do totally feel like it was the one area where my family and I really overlapped my passion, because outside of celebrating the Blazers, if I went out and shot like shot hoops, with the neighborhood kids or something like that, my family really didn't
Mm.
take part. My dad did later on in life, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting duality because I definitely experienced what you experienced, which was my parents ran a restaurant. And the
Mm.
only time that my dad would take time off from the restaurant is if the Lakers were playing. And in the 80s, we were pretty good. And so I just
Yep.
remember my mom cooking dinner for us so we could all sit around our tiny TV and watch the Lakers play. And
Hmm.
getting to go to the Great Western Forum because I won the scholarship to go to college. I got to be that little kid with the big check that Chick Hearns handed me.
Wow.
So
Oh,
for
that's
me,
amazing.
I definitely felt like that was our entree into American culture. It was the one place where it
For
didn't matter the
sure.
color of your skin. You got to participate and you got to wear your Lakers gear. I'm going to go see the Lakers play tonight. What is interesting is you playing the sport, which was something that was not encouraged in my family either. So, what was that like playing a sport where your family wasn't into it?
I mean, I feel like from a very young age, I was just, the way that I was. And
Mm.
um, I don't know. I think I dealt with it. I think my dad really leaned in, which was great. He was active. And then I think, I was pretty popular in school. So like when I got to school, the kids, we're all so young that kind of those stereotypes hadn't sunk
Mm,
in yet. So when it came to like recess, it was not a big deal that I would be the only girl playing. Like nobody
mm,
cared. And it was fun and carefree. And it's the same thing that you mentioned, Lisa, where like, my parents worked multiple jobs so that I could go to a private school. I actually went to a Catholic school until third or fourth grade, about halfway through. And you know, we lived in a real bad part of town, and all the kids or most all the kids at the private school were really from the neighborhoods that were upper middle class. And so, fortunately, there was dress code, so that made things a lot easier. But then, the sport became the great equalizer. I
yeah.
stepped onto the court, and nobody cared, who my parents were, how much money they had. Whereas, it was different when you got picked up by your parents, and everyone's like looking at what kind of car your dad drives, like that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, I think it was interesting, but also like I had a strong support network ever since I was a young kid, whether it was teachers, mentors, other players, coaches, and my friends. And family is family. And it didn't, like, the love was still there. And then I had like a cousin that I grew up with, and he was 3 years older than me, and he was tough. He was tough on me, and so it really, like, it got all of the we competed at everything.
I love. Well, that means you were a trailblazer early on, being the only girl on the
Oh, I
court. I
mean,
love that. It feels like it's in the DNA of your story.
I
Before,
vaguely remember playing shooting hoops in elementary school, and the sisters were out watching, and one of them was like, "Jenny, we're going to see you in the NBA one day." I remember her saying that,
yes.
and it was really sweet. Yeah.
I love that. Well, before we get into the sports bra, what do you love about basketball? Can you just tell me what are the things you love about the game? We could go
Oh my
on about
gosh.
this, by the way. I feel
Yeah.
like, did Aaron Gallagher know that we were going to be kindred spirits, like immigrant daughters who grew up not so wealthy, challenged the status quo?
Probably. I mean, she knows. I feel
She
like she's
knows.
10 steps ahead of all of
She
us,
is. She
right?
is. She is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, well, one thing that I love about basketball, which is true for a lot of sports, is the team mentality. The idea
Mm,
that nobody does anything alone,
mm,
that it requires working collaborative work, and that everybody brings something different, something special, and something that the team needs. And
mm,
if, and, I think it's really important as a coach or a GM to see the weakest links, work towards people's strength, all of those things. But those are things that are happening at a super young age and subconsciously. And so growing up, having played any sport, but for me, it was basketball, I learned so many things, so many things. And, we can talk about statistics around CEOs and women and leadership and friendship and, all those things. But when it comes down to exactly why basketball, I'm not entirely sure. I think maybe the Blazers had a huge hand in it. Um, and just, really admiring those athletes. And then obviously, like when the Dream Team came around,
yeah.
of Lisa Leslie, Cheryl Swoops, Don Staley, that whole team, it just like I admired those women so much. And, I knew that there were other sports out there, but I just didn't care for them. There was something about the athleticism of basketball, the the grit. And I mean, people can talk about that with anything, softball, volleyball, swimming. So I think it's just where you find yourself. And for me, basketball it was really the first thing that I gravitated towards. And also growing up poor, like it cost
Hmm.
nothing to have a basketball.
Yeah.
And even if I didn't have a hoop, I would pick a mark on a brick wall, and I just shoot at the mark, just shoot at that mark. And then, I dribble all the time. I dribble while I was, whatever I was doing, I had a basketball all the time. And it just felt very accessible compared to other sports for me. And it didn't
Yeah.
really require anyone else to be there. Like, with softball, it's probably best if somebody's pitching or catching or,
Yeah.
chasing things. And with a basketball, I could just lose entire days out
Yeah.
by myself. So I think that was a big part of it too.
I love that point on accessibility because I grew up in the 70s, 80s and 90s and I where you saw women in sports arenas were tennis, figure skating, gymnastics, right? These very solo activities that required a tremendous amount of wealth to participate. And so I love this idea of basketball, soccer. There were a couple of sports where you saw prominent women playing it and you could
Mhm.
access it for yourself. I love that. The Sports Bra is the first ever sports bar 100% dedicated to supporting and showing women's sports. Tell me where
Mhm.
you got this idea and what's your goal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize, like I said, I didn't realize that I was going to be the first one until I started looking up information, and I couldn't find anything on anyone else doing it. And what happened was, so being a major basketball fan and player for my whole life, as I got older, I started to connect with other people through pickup games, leagues, just find each other online to just play women's hoops together, and just built this really intense friendship and community around women's basketball. And so we would want to go out. We'd go out for birthdays, celebrations, post-game celebrations, and it would always generally be at a sports bar. And we'd always want to watch women's basketball. And it was very challenging every time, whether it was, getting them to even show it on TV
Mm.
to being able to, eat the food on the menu. Like I had a lot of friends that were vegan or vegetarian or dairy free or whatever. And, just in general, sports bars weren't accommodating. And it started to feel like more and more often, sports bars weren't designed for folks like me. But it really came to a head when a group of us went to go watch the NCAA championship, women's
Mm.
basketball championship in 2018. And there was probably a dozen of us, maybe 14 of us, that rolled into this bar. And like that game is the biggest game of the year to us. Um, and we walk in and none of the TVs have it on. And there's like, 35 TVs in there. None of them have the game on. But it was relatively empty in there. So we were just like, hey, can you guys change the channel? They're like, absolutely, let's do that. And so we pushed all these tables together. We ordered food, drinks, and we ended up watching this game, which turned out to be one of the best NCAA games I'd ever seen. And it was a dramatic comeback from behind with a last second three-pointer to win it all. And we were just so celebratory. And I remember like standing up, high-fiving everybody. I like took my hat off and I threw it. And while I was like in my celebration mode, I remember catching a glimpse of the rest of the bar and people were just like looking at us because nobody was watching the game we were watching. So we were like isolated celebrating our own thing, which, in hindsight is something. But at the time, we were accustomed to that. So we were leaving this bar and I was hugging my friend. And I was like, that's the best game I've ever seen. And she was just like, yeah, it would have been so much better if the sound had been on. And I hadn't realized that we'd watched this whole game with no sound. And I think that there was a different game that was on this massive projector with the sound on. And it was like some regular season men's game. I don't know what it was, but it definitely wasn't our game. And so when she said that to me, I was like frustrated at myself, like mad at myself that I hadn't even realized it. And so out of sheer frustration, I said, the only way we're ever going to watch a women's game the way that it deserves to be watched is if we had our own place.
Mm.
And I like blurted it out and we were all like laughing. We were like, wouldn't that be the day? Like, la 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 la, high five. And then everybody leaves. And I think either later that day or the next day I was driving and I was thinking about how I'd said it. And I was just like, man, if we had our own place, what would we call it? And then the very first thing I thought of was the sports bra. And I just laughed. I remember being in the car by myself and just like laughing and trying to think of names that were better than that. And I was just like, no, it's so catchy. It's hilarious. I think it's really funny. And then I was just like, oh, I have the tagline for it already. It's "We support women." And I just thought it was so funny. And so I told my friends about it, and we just started to use it as like a fantasy place. We would just mention it, whenever we were disgruntled at sports bars, which was all the time, basically. We were like, oh, at the sports bra, they would have, vegan, gluten-free options, or oh, at the sports bra, you'd never run out of toilet paper in the ladies' restroom, or Oh, at the sports bra,
On
gymnastics
the-
championship, college gymnastics championship would be on. And so it was just it was like kind of this running joke slash fantasy place that we would just refer to. And that's all it was for years.
Mm,
Yeah, and it wasn't until 2020 during the pandemic when things really shifted and the entire world was like felt upside down and um, swaths of people were reevaluating their role and what they wanted to do with their lives, how they wanted to show up for their community, for the world, for the people, and how everybody didn't want to go back to normal. They wanted to go back to
mm,
something, but it was an opportunity to really change how things used to be.
mm,
And I was one of those people. And so during the pandemic, I started to think about what I was really good at. I was never really that good at basketball, but I was very passionate about basketball. And then prior to the sports bra, I was a chef for a little over 15 years. So that had been my only career, was cooking. And so I was just like, what can I do with these two things?
mm.
And the woman I was dating at the time, she was just like, hey, you know how you always joke about the sports bra? And I was like, yeah. She goes, why don't you do that? And I
I
literally
love
laughed in her
that.
face. I literally laughed in her face because one, I never thought of it as a real thing. Like I never considered it as an actual, I like to an actual thing to plan for. And the second thing is that, here we were, millions of people were dying. The entire
Mm,
world felt like it was on fire. There were social justice movements demanding systemic change. And I thought, the sports bra, like, how would that matter?
mm,
Like, what difference would a bar make? And so when she said it to me, I literally laughed in her face. And those were the two main reasons. But it was just like, once she said it, I started to really think about it. And I started
mm,
to really think about Portland as my hometown, as the city that I love, and um, how it was really downcasted in media and kind of the whipping boy of media during the really hard times. And I just thought, gosh, I wonder if it could at least shine a light on Portland and like
yeah,
bring some levity back to the city that I love. And I really started to think about it in a very hyper local way.
yeah.
And I started to think about how when I grew up, I saw women's sports fandom, and I just started to dig in a little bit, a little bit, a little bit until it was all I could think about. It was what I dreamt about. It's what I talked about nonstop. And then I got to that proverbial fork in the road
Yeah.
where you either do it or you don't do it. And I knew that I would have to make that choice. Yeah. And so I don't know how many folks know this, but prior to opening the sports bra, I was unemployed for a little over 5 years. So by choice. And so I was living like kind of this semi-retired life happily. And then the pandemic came and kind of turned everything upside down. But yeah, so I had this choice of, stay retired and not working and, keep plugging along at whatever I was doing, or this other thing, which is super risky, takes a lot of money, takes a lot, I mean, I had worked for mom and pop restaurants when I was
Yeah.
cutting my teeth as a cook. And so I had seen kind of what business ownership, particularly bar and restaurant business ownership, looks like on the back end. And it is not the glorified job that a lot of folks think
No,
about,
I
but
grew up around my
mhm,
parents running an all-you-can-eat Mongolian barbecue. So we're going to dive into what the
mhm,
next step you took was. But if I step back and think about this, one, I always say you write the book you most need to read yourself, you create the business you most want to solve the need for. So I feel like you check the box on, I see this unmet need. And if not someone else, why not me? The second thing is, and I always say, immigrants, if you grow up around immigrants, they believe in something before they can see it. They will ideas into existence. They create something from nothing. If you ask me to leave my home country to go to a place where I don't speak the language, and start all over again, and I saw my parents do it over and over again, you're like, okay, all right, it's built into me. And then the
mhm.
third thing, which I think is fascinating, is I'm the type of entrepreneur that never asks anyone to sign an NDA. I always go, everyone has ideas. In fact, My ideas someone's thought about multiple times. It's the will
Hmm.
to execute. And I
Yep.
always say, if you are a real entrepreneur, you tell everybody about your idea. You say, I love, no, that's what you said. At the sports bra, we would do this. And I told everybody because two things happen. One, people hold you accountable. They're like, oh, how's that idea going? And two, they put fingerprints on your journey. They're like, well, I know the person at the TV station, or I know someone at this magazine. I'm going to introduce you because you're going to need some press. And the more you
Hmm.
talk about it, the more you really are an entrepreneur. Because it becomes something you can't not do. You have to execute something. So as I was
Hmm.
hearing your story, I was like, oh, these are all the things that I think all the time, right? Which is, why not me? I've seen it done over and over again in my own childhood. And if I keep talking about it, someone's going to hold me accountable or someone's going to push me to do it or help me to do it. So I just wanted to like highlight those things. So what did you do? Did you raise money? Did you take out life savings? Like, how did you get started?
I did everything that I could to get the money, honestly. So, I've been unemployed for a little over 5 years. So I'd been kind of tapping the savings account that entire time. So by the time I came up with the idea and really wanted to push go on it, there wasn't that much left. But I did drain everything that I had. And then I, applied for all those traditional loans, traditional lending banks, SBA loans. I kind of figured I'd get denied by everybody, and which happened. So, I had another game plan, which was to put together my very first pitch deck.
Mm.
So I put together a very rudimentary deck on Keynote, and then I pitched my friends and family and did like handshake loans and kind of made people promise not to disown me if I didn't pay them back. And between my what I had in savings and those handshake loans, I felt like I had enough to at least start looking at locations while I was applying for these other CDFIs loans. And the CDFI loans have a lot of red tape, ins and outs. It was going to
Yeah.
take like 6 months to figure out anything. And what I'd read at the time was that it would take me about 4 to 6 months to find the right location. So I was just like, let me just do this while I wait. And then, of course, 3 weeks into looking, I opened the door on what is now the sports bra. And it was one of those moments where, it was a Thai restaurant at the time. As soon as I opened the door, I looked around and I could see where the flags were going to hang. I could see where the trophy shelf was going to be. I could see where the TVs were going to live. And I like hated myself for even walking through the doors that day because I had
Like,
seen
damn
it
it.
and I know, and I'd wanted it, but I didn't have the resources. And it's crazy because I met the landlord that day, and he was a former chef. And so he and I got along very well. Like, as soon as he opened his mouth, I was like, oh, we know each other already. And he'd already had several people look at the building. And because it was the pandemic,
Mm.
landlords were really like cutting cutting prices down. And so there was it was a really great deal that he was offering. And then the restaurant was just ready to bow out, cut the lease, leave all of everything, leave their dishes, equipment, everything. So they wanted a quick turn. And so he'd already seen several people, and he read my business plan. And that day I shook his hand. I was just like, I love it, but I'm not ready for it. Like, financially, I do not have it. And he goes, listen, I love this concept. He was like, he goes, I want it to live in my building. He goes,
Mm.
I'll give you 24 hours to think about it. And if you want to do it, it's yours.
Oh,
Um, and I couldn't believe it, like I was very straightforward with him that I didn't have the resources. So I slept on it. And what's crazy is that, and Lisa, like, nobody really believes me when I say this, but I'm pretty risk averse. Like, I don't like taking risks. I like to be comfortable. I like to stay safe. I'm happy go lucky, and I'm pretty easygoing. So once I find something that I like, I will stay there forever.
okay.
So I go home and I sleep on it, and I wake up the next day, and for whatever reason, I say, I want the bra to be there. We can figure this out. And so we went ahead, we signed the lease.
Ah,
I signed it in December of 2021. And then I got the keys on February 1st of 2022. And then I decided to launch a Kickstarter campaign to make up the rest of the funds because the CDFI hadn't come through yet. And I knew that I needed something fast because we are going to try to get open. And long ago, I had decided, well, in my business plan, I had decided that I wanted April 1st, 2022 to be our grand opening day. But I
Mm.
didn't tell anybody that until about a week prior because I wasn't sure if we would make it. Obviously getting the keys on February 1st, that's opening February, March, April. That's opening 3 months later, which
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend to anybody.
No.
I also wouldn't recommend going from unemployed to owning a business. Um, like it's a pretty steep trajectory. But anyway, yeah, I decided to launch a Kickstarter on Valentine's Day of 2022. And the Kickstarter was what really did the trick. I mean, yeah, we
Yeah.
based on my projections, we needed $49,000 from complete strangers. And we ended up, you know, doubling over more than doubling
Wow.
our goal, which is wild. But that was the Kickstarter was the first time that I had the idea out in like a very public sphere outside of like my friends and family. And so up until that moment, I wasn't sure, if the sports bra was really going to be something that the general public would embrace. I just knew that in my circles, people were really excited.
Well, and I love what was the significance of April 1st, 2022, other than it being April Fool's Day? Was there any
Yeah,
significance?
it's the actual date of that 2018 game that I watched at the bar with my friends. Hmm.
Yes, I well, and as entrepreneurs, I love a deadline, right? Because otherwise you'll
Yeah.
never it's like that Lorne Michaels Saturday Night Live quote where he says, the show doesn't go on because it's ready. The show goes on because it's Saturday at 11:30 p.m. And I love that mentality. Like, we'll just make it better as we go along. Like if we open the doors and things are falling apart, it's okay. That just shows us what we
Hmm.
need to fix around here. I
Yeah.
love that
Yep.
that's the same date 4 years later. That's
Exactly.
phenomenal.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
phenomenal. And who walked in the doors on that first day?
Oh my gosh, grand opening day. Well, let's just say that our POS system crashed that weekend. We absolutely overwhelmed, yeah, everything. We saw about 3,000 people in the first weekend that we opened, which is insane because our bar seats 40. So if you think about what that looks like. But we had folks lining up hours prior to us opening. Every news station in town was there. Um, I remember one of the very first folks to enter were a couple women who were the very first women to play um, sports in Oregon after Title IX was signed. And so that they were there. There was a pair of women who were there. And then it was, I mean, like people from the community. I know that there was a Yukon team that went as soon as they found out that the sports bra was opening, they got on a group chat or something and all flew in from different parts of town to come to our grand opening. And
Oh,
they were the three-peat team from Yukon who won 3 championships in a row. Um, and she actually reached out to me and asked me if I could reserve a table for them. And I was just like, I am so sorry, but there's no way we're doing any reservations. And so, they waited, hours and hours with
oh,
everyone else. But they came in and there was lots of tears. There was a lot of
mm.
crying. Me and my staff and also guests.
It's like
We were
that
just all
scene in a
very
league of
overwhelmed.
it's like that scene in A League of Their Own where they walk into their section of the baseball museum and you're just like bawling. Uh,
It was a lot. It was a lot.
But what I love what you share. I always say vulnerability is connection. Like this was not easy, and most entrepreneurs are not killing it. I always say every time an entrepreneur says they're killing it, I'm like, no, this is a dark and sad life. You're running out of cash. You're not sure where the next opportunity is coming from. If we were all killing it, there will be a lot. That's like a mass murder situation. Everything, a lot of dead things. I love that you shared how hard it was to get to
Oh
this
yeah.
place.
Hmm. I
Where
mean,
is it?
it
Yeah, go
is,
ahead.
it's so difficult. And I feel like, you know, that entrepreneurship journey looks different for a lot of folks, but ultimately it is there are so many things that tie us together, And prior to opening the sports bra, I had no idea. I'd never run a business. I had never had any interest in owning a business. And so those were not my circles. And as soon as, the word got out, there were all of these organizations,
Mm.
women of color, Vietnamese associations that were all business owners, entrepreneurs, small business owners that just came in and just wrapped me up. And when I was able to talk to somebody about the struggles that I felt like were just my own, obviously everyone was just like, "Oh my God, yeah, honey, we here do
Yeah.
these are the things." And it's just one of those things where I had no idea. I had no idea. So
Yeah.
the resources are definitely out there, but the struggle is definitely real. And even though, it feels like even when businesses feel like they're killing it, there's always still so much to do, so many things driving us and so many like stressors and all the things, and really, the publicity only wants to highlight the really great things.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
but yeah,
no, I think that we have to be open with people around. This is not easy. Like we're celebrated when we have these huge moments. So the TV show Portlandia. I'm going to make a Portlandia reference. There is a skit where they kind of make fun of the fact that it's not always sunny in Portland, and the characters have these lawn chairs, and there's like a little patch of sun, and they're sitting on their lawn chairs. They're kind of like sunglasses on, and then the clouds move a little bit, and they pick up their lawn chairs and they go and chase the next patch of sun. And so they're running all over Portland looking for these little patches of sun. And I would say that's entrepreneurship, right? This is like a really long tunnel. There's probably not a light at the end of it, but little skylights, little patches of sun that when we feel them, we get to bask in them. And then we realize we got to pick up the lawn chair and keep moving on to the next one.
yeah,
So I know it's
constant
never
journey.
easy.
Hmm.
Where are you going with the sports bra? I've seen all the press around the expansion, the franchising, the investors. Where is this going?
Yeah, I mean, so when I opened the sports bra, I only saw it as an individual space. And I was just like, we're coming out of a pandemic. I would love it if this could last a couple of years, and then we could say we did it. Um, but like in my business plan, at the very end, they always ask, where do you see your company in 5 years, 10 years, 25 years? And in my dream scenario, like I was just like, okay, this is where I dream big. And I thought, okay, I can see if this is successful, that the bra could live in maybe a dozen major markets across the US, the ones that have both a W team and a soccer team. And that was like as big as I dreamed. And then they were like, what kind of partnerships or organizations do you see yourself would you love to see in 10, 15 years? And I listed places like Nike, Adidas, doing something with the WNBA would be amazing. Um, and that's where that quote comes from that's on the shirt, where like we did all of those things minus the expansion to 12 cities. We did all of those things in the first 12 months of being
Oh,
open. So that to me
oh,
was insane. And another story that I love to tell that is crazy to me is that a few weeks, I feel like maybe 4 or 5 weeks after we had our grand opening, one of my bartenders texted me, and I was on like an ice run. I was driving to the store to get more ice because we'd run out. And she texted me, and it was like this long text. And I thought it was, some emergency. So I pulled the car over and I start reading her text. And the very first block of the text was, Jenny, I had a dream about the sports bra last night. And she said that in her dream, she was like in her 70s. She had like one of those walkers and she was going into the sports bra, except that this one wasn't the one in Portland. And she walked up to the host, and the host was like, "Hey, welcome to the sports bra." And she told the host that, guess what? You wouldn't believe it, but I helped open the very first one in Portland. And then the host was like laughing and kind of like shushing her up, like, get out of here. You know you didn't. And that was her dream. And then in the second block, she basically was just said that, she was very appreciative of the opportunity to help open something that really was very special and help to build something that mattered. And I think she was 23 or something at the time. So I'm just like reading this text and like bawling in the car. I'm just like crying on the side of the road. And I'm just thinking about how here is this 23-year-old bartender who had dreamed bigger than I would ever dream or allow myself to dream for myself and for the bra. And how she had envisioned a legacy for this business before I ever thought about it. Here I was trying to just get ice so that we
get
could make
ice.
drinks. Yeah, like how am I going to have build a legacy if I can't even, keep ice in the ice machine? So that to me was like a key moment where I was just like, oh my gosh, what we're doing here matters and it's special and it's important. I need to figure out what it is that we are doing with the sports bra. And, on the one hand, we have really great investors and we're going into a franchise mode that is we're very excited about it. And these are just like building more sports bars in different communities and being connected in a super authentic way, the same way that the Portland location is connected with our
Mm,
community here. But in another way, the sports bra is so much more than a bar, so much more than the four walls that hold TVs and food and drinks. It is building a culture, a movement. It is a dedicated like experience for women's
mm,
sports fandom. And that's something that we are trying to lean into. So on the one hand, we have this very pro forma written out guidelines, the Bible on the sports bra bar and restaurant and franchise expansion. And on the other hand, there is
mm.
this massive vision for what the sports bra can be and what we want it to be as a global brand that is experiential. It's about women's sports fandom. It's about connection to the community. Right now, we're hearing tons and tons of talk about athletes and the leagues and the teams and their growth and investment, which is all absolutely freaking awesome and absolutely necessary. And then we're talking about like people buying tickets and fandom growing, increasing viewership, all of that stuff, which is awesome. But for us, the real story lies in the folks at the bar. The
Yeah.
real story lies in the folks in those seats. And so being able to connect with those communities and tell their story is where we see the sports bra being something more than just a bar and restaurant or just four walls. So that feels like a whole other part of the vision. And for me and my team, it's leaning into all the different ways of how we can tap into that and what that looks like. And there are so many things that I don't know. It's just like I don't
Yeah.
know what it is. And for us, it's really the challenge is to grow the bra in whatever way it needs to feed the community and feed women's sports. And I can't even pretend to know what that looks like, especially with the dramatic growth. But whatever it is, we want to be there and we want to do it. The one thing that about the bar itself is that it disrupted the status quo.
Yeah.
For over 40 years, Americans had become accustomed to a sports bar being really men's sports and
Hmm.
men being the clientele that they were catering to,
Hmm.
period. And so creating the sports bra really was disruptive to the system. And so having that as part of our ethos, I think that there is some really great ways that we can be disruptive and change the game, and continue to do that.
So, Jenny, you and I shared this over email, but selfishly, when am I getting one in New York? It's coming, right? I need to just a nod, just a yes, someday you're going to get one, Lisa.
Someday you're going to get one, Lisa. We have
Okay.
plans for everywhere. But yeah, there's lots of talk. We're in a slow roll just because we've never done this before. We
Yeah.
just figured out how to run a restaurant, let alone a bunch. But honestly, franchising is its own business, and so we're
Yeah.
learning how to franchise, which is a fascinating and gigantic step.
Or maybe, Jenny, I could just host you all for a pop up because, as you know, I'm a Liberty fan. And
Yes.
during their extraordinary playoff run, I was that person that walked into bars and said, I would like the Liberty game on and made people change the game over.
Hell yeah.
My younger brother has had season tickets to the Liberty. I remember when there were 3,000 people in the arena and it was just us and my brother wearing his equality jersey. I mean, we are those kids, right? And
Love
he
it.
took me to one of the finals games. It's the one they lost, which was kind of sad. But I turned my boyfriend into a Liberty fan. He's a Nets fan. And I said,
Mhm.
how are you not a Liberty fan? And he said, I just don't understand women's basketball. And over the course of that playoff run, he became the biggest WNBA fan. And we literally
Mhm.
would walk into the coolest bars in New York and just say, could you please turn on the Liberty game? And they like, what? I'm like, yes, I'm a paying customer. I'm going to watch the
Yeah.
Liberty game. And that's the moment where I was like, I'm going to ask Jenny if maybe I could host a pop up for the WNBA playoffs.
Absolutely.
I'll
I
find
don't
you a
know if you know this,
space.
Lisa, but we did a pop up in Brooklyn for the finals. We were
Okay,
there
well,
last
I
year.
missed it. I missed it. Okay, then I want an invite to the pop up
Hmm.
this year, but I will
There
find
we
a
go.
space too. I'm also very resourceful. I want
I
to,
love it. I love it. We have bra squad supporters everywhere. So the more the
I'm in.
merrier.
If there's an official committee for New York City, please put me on it. I will help. I will identify the real estate. I will find the vendors and contractors, whoever franchises it. You're going to say, Lisa, you should franchise it because maybe that's the right answer. Okay, maybe that's the right answer. I
Mm.
should be part of the group that franchises New York. Did I just commit to that, Jenny? Maybe. You probably already have somebody fancy doing it, though. But if you don't, put me on the committee. All right. All right. So my
Love the
team.
plug.
Okay. No, I am serious, though, Jenny. When I say things out loud, they tend to happen. So,
Okay.
all right.
Duly noted.
So my team put this in front of me. It's not a name drop, but I did get to spend some time with Adam Silver a few months ago. And I was the only person brave enough in this mostly male summit to ask him a hard question. And I asked him about the WNBA. And at the time, after the Liberty won, there was all this controversy that came out around investment in the teams and whatnot. And he said something quite interesting. He said he had sat next to Serena Williams at an event and he was talking about, oh, the rise of women's sports. And she's turned to him and she said, we've been here all along. And it made him think really hard about how much gatekeepers like the media, sports channels had kept us away from women's sports.
Mhm.
What do you see happening now in terms of sports viewership? Because I do agree, we've been here all along and now we have streaming. Like, what are all the forces at work that allows greater access, greater representation, the birth of your concept on a global scale? What are all the things that are happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many variables, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is literally the decades and decades and decades of women and trailblazers who have been carving out this space for
Mm.
so long. And I'm not just talking about on the field, but I'm talking about off the field, including sportscasters, sports writers, sports photographers, and then you have coaches, GMs, athletic trainers. I mean, women have been working tirelessly for decades in and out of sports without any recognition,
Hmm.
any respect, any investment. And slowly but surely, they've been proving themselves, having to prove themselves, and earning the the positions of power. And so folks often ask me, Jenny, do you feel like this is one of those blips, those popular women's basketball blips or women's sporting event blips because somebody won a championship or whatever? Because we've seen blips in the past, including that dream team I referred to,
Mm-hmm.
with Lisa Leslie, Cheryl Swoops. Like, I remember them on Wheaties boxes, Nike commercials. And I was like, this is it. This is our time. Like, women's basketball is here to stay. And then the very next year, it was like back to its normal, like low ratings. And so to me, we cannot talk about the current state of women's sports or the future of women's sports without first giving major kudos to the foundational builders who have been doing it for decades on the back end. And I'm not just talking about athletes, which have clearly been here, but all the women going into C suites and have fought and clawed their way to break the glass ceiling in every form or fashion. And so the big difference to me is women in positions of power, whether at tops of networks, owning teams themselves, or coaching them, women
Mm-hmm.
who are writing the stories. Because if you are able to tell the stories of women's sports, that connection is much deeper than any stat line can ever be. And so you have women telling stories, showing stories, and then the opportunity of social media to give the power to the people, and like anybody can get on there and post stories and make a name for themselves and then build a huge amount of fandom and traction. Um, Whereas it's not gatekept by, a rich white man at the very top. That's like, this story, guys don't care about this. Nobody's going to watch this on Sports Center. Like, that kind of stuff has been being worked on by powerful women who've been fighting and clawing for decades. And so I think that is a drastic difference. And that to me is one of the big game changers.
Yeah, it's this really. I love that you talked about the blip because the Caitlin Clark effect, the Angel Reese effect. Everyone was like, "This is a." I said no because What we're now sitting at the center of is real capitalization. So we have real dollars at work, sponsorships, investments in teams. I think Claire Wu-Tsai's done an amazing job. Just there's money. I think when there's money, you start to feel like this is going to really have momentum and be lasting. I said the second thing is the media is no longer controlling the narrative, whether it's social media, streaming platforms. I don't just have one network that controls what I get to watch now. So yes, I can walk into a sports bar and say, please put this on. It's on ESPN2 or where is it? And then the third thing is folks like you. I think what I think gels people is community. And so when you were talking about the sports bra, yes, it's an operating model, it's a restaurant, it's all these things. But I like the second point you made is when you have places of community, and I will be at your pop-up next year or this year, whatever it is, I will be there this summer. I think that is what gives that momentum, that extra boost, right? Is when you can sit next to someone, you still have the same jersey on. I'm wearing that seafoam green, and we're talking about Big Ellie and her latest routine. That for me has staying power, which we have not had. We haven't had capital, media streaming rights, and now a community. So it feels lasting for the first time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And women's sports has gotten this far with very little. And so now if we start to see things pour in, I don't think people can even imagine what the future holds for women's sports. I really see a dramatic trajectory that is a cultural shift, not just in women's sports, but in sports in general.
Yeah. Well, okay, last question. It's the final one, which is, what is your point of view on equal pay? There's so many voices on this, and I want to know what you think about it.
We talk a lot about equality and equity, and I'm all about vying for equity, and those are two different things. And so there is a lot more factors involved in equity, and that includes, giving people the same launching pad, giving people the same resources. So it's not just about the check at the end of the day. It's about all the ways that they got to that spot. And if we can get to equity, the other stuff will follow. To me, equal pay feels like a super binary way to cut something up. And it doesn't speak to just the nuances of what it all entails. So I think it looks great. I'm all for paying athletes what they deserve, like what they have earned, how hard they've worked, a portion of revenue, like whatever model it's based off of. But I'm more interested in equitable treatment and equitable pay.
Yeah, no, and I think that's actually a great point, because when I read the story of the Liberty in terms of when I think about resources, it's the same training facilities. It's the same level of investment for being in Barclays Center, not in a place in Connecticut, the same level of marketing dollars, because those players can now go get endorsements and sponsorship deals, right? It's the platform being equal. And now that we've sold out, the Liberty sold out Barclays more than the Nets did. And so now we have a hope that in the next 5 to 10 years that the pay scales start to look a little bit closer, because the underlying business model is healthy once they've returned on the investment. That's what I always tell people, like they can't push a button today to make equal pay a reality. But you're right. It's the resources and the platforms being the same so that you have a chance to get there. So I like that. Exactly I like that framing. Jenny, you're so cool. I'm so happy you came on to one of our first episodes. I really, they always say best friend's a tier, not a title. I'm going to totally try to get into your friend tier. Like this is not even a thing. I'm really honored you came on today.
You're very sweet. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been such a fun time. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And great questions. I feel like, we really tapped into a lot of different things. And, it's really great to meet you. And I love everything that you guys are doing and amplifying voices. Thank you so much for the opportunity to do so.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of In Confidence. I learned a lot from Jenny about what it takes to invest in yourself, put an idea out there, and keep talking about it, because it'll just get better with time. I love that she used a Kickstarter campaign so that people could have fingerprints on her journey. And on top of it, she's a leader in a movement to bring more women's sports to the forefront. I hope you're leaving this space a little bit stronger than when you entered it. And if you love this episode, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe so you never miss a moment of inspiration. Until next time, in the words of my 9-year-old self, I see you, I value you, and I believe in you. Just a little reminder, this podcast does not dispense medical advice or prescribe the use of any technique as a form of treatment for physical, emotional, or medical problems without the advice of a physician, either directly or indirectly. The intent of the podcast is only to offer information of a general nature to help you in your quest for emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being.